Welcome back, true believers and spectacular Spidey fans, to another really awesome Spider-Man PS4 related video. And not only is it going to be a video that you have been wanting me to do for quite some time now, I actually have two awesome Spidey Squad members here with me discussing this topic in full-on analytic detail. So go ahead and introduce yourself, guys.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's DuckedDuck, and welcome to this collab I'm doing with Evan and Araknid-Tech.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Araknid-Tech here.
These are two really amazing Spidey Squad members. Go follow them on Twitter, on YouTube. They'll both be doing more Spider-Man PS4 videos and talking about other Spider-Man related topics. Go on our Discord server if you want to talk to them more. But nonetheless, let's get into the main nitty-gritty aspect of one feature that everyone has either been praising as one of the coolest parts of the E3 2017 demo for Spider-Man PS4, or one of the parts that didn't live up to everyone's expectations, which was the combat of the game. So, before we get into the huge discussion of Spider-Man PS4's combat and what Insomniac have said in their E3 interviews and on Twitter, and what they have been talking about and how the combat is going to work in the game, DuckedDuck, Araknid-Tech, and I are going to break down all of the previous Spider-Man games and their installments of combat, ranging from all the earliest ones all the way back in 2000 up to the most recent Spider-Man game with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and then we will have an honorable mention of one game in particular that everyone's comparing it to by the end of the video. So first, we're going to start off with Spider-Man PS1, or everyone also calls it Spider-Man N64, but it was the Spider-Man game in 2000. It was the very first main game that Spider-Man was in for the old school days, having Rino Romano voice Spider-Man. And in that game, even though it might not have seemed like it, the way the combat was handled with Spider-Man being really fast-paced, very action-based, very agile, and very fluid back then for the PS1 or the N64 in the year of 2000 was very groundbreaking in the superhero genre of video games, and how it affected the way of Spider-Man fighting villains and bosses within that game, ranging from using your webs to different web abilities to different ways of just using really cool agile feats of agility, pretty much just being able to bounce from one enemy to the other in a really old school type of way was very cool to see back in the day. So what are your guys' thoughts on this version of combat for the PS1 Spider-Man game?
Well, the combat, it's pretty, jagged looking in animation terms, but, I mean, it's fine and it works. It's your basic punching and kicking, and there's not much more to it, and, like the webbing enemies and stuff, for them to have to stand still while you can regain web fluid, that's not nice, but it was really just a basic combat system, and it was there to prolong the game, I would say.
Well, before this, there was, other games, I think Lara Croft would be one of them, or something like that, and I don't think there were very many games with, kind of 3D kind of combat style. I don't think so, I don't know, I'm not really sure, but it's like DuckedDuck said, it worked fine at the time. It was good for what it was, and trapping enemies, all the web combos you could do, like the exploding web dome. It had just a very unique combat style, especially when it came to the webbing.
Exactly, yeah, I totally agree with you guys, and mainly this version of combat does actually apply to this main game and also two other Spider-Man games, is actually Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, which was also on the PS1, and Spider-Man the movie game with Tobey Maguire in 2002. And basically, the difference between the first Spider-Man game in 2000, Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, and Spider-Man the movie game, is that they all had the similar basic game pattern of having that combat style where you had square to punch, circle to kick, triangle to web, and X to jump, and then you could also use the directional buttons to use different web combinations, like Araknid-Tech and DuckedDuck said, where you can use web fists or web domes or other web variations in your web shooter varieties that you can use with enemies, and you could also web yank enemies towards you and then kick them or punch them to the ground, taking them down instantly. And then Spider-Man the movie game improved on that by having the same aspect of combat in regards to having square to punch, circle to kick, triangle to web, and X to jump. They actually tried to include combat in a very cool way with kicking and punching and making those buttons switch into combos where you can mix and match the button presses together to get different move sets. So that way you had more variety, you had more of a feeling that you were this super-powered hero being able to do these crazy cool moves that only Spider-Man can do in the comics, and that's what they tried to do in all those games, and for the time back in the early years of 2000, it was really cool to see that be played out. But now, we're getting into the main other aspect of a groundbreaking title, which of course everyone considers the best Spider-Man game in terms of swinging, but also sometimes in terms of combat, which actually inspired the Arkham combat, and that is Spider-Man 2. So what I mean by that is when they inspired the Arkham combat is because Spider-Man 2 revolutionized the superhero genre of games where they actually had dodging be a part of the combat and then inflict damage with your enemies after dodging through counterattacks, and then allowing yourself to be using different web moves, again with more combo moves. But since this was the first ever free-roaming Spider-Man game, you were also allowed to do huge varieties with the environment. You could hang people upside down from lampposts, you could swing them around a giant web rodeo, or you could just knock them down with 2 punches and then 1 giant flip kick, and then also use your spider reflexes to slow down time to take them out in a cooler style variety of your arachnid-based attacks. So what are your guys' thoughts on this?
There's definitely a lot of variety in the Spider-Man 2 combat, and like you said, Evan, it really did define the genre. It's fluid like the Arkham games, and it's like the Arkham games, mostly because of the spider sense, which they actually introduced, and the Arkham games totally ripped off, in my opinion. And now, anytime a game uses spider sense or counter dodge or just dodge in general, it has to be the Arkham combat automatically.
My thoughts, personally, are the Spider-Man movie game trilogy. They did a lot of things before Arkham, and yet everybody wants to point to Arkham doing it first. Arkham did it better, because there was the it's like DuckedDuck said it. There was the combat from Spider-Man 2, which, yes, the combat is amazing. Yes, most of the time it's probably just button mashing. Another thing I wanted to say was that another thing people say that I think the later Amazing Spider-Man games ripped off were the detective vision. When the Spider-Man 3 game came out, they had like a Spidey sense where like all the enemies were highlighted red. There was like certain clues that were like highlighted and all that, and everything would go into like a different color or something now. And then everybody just ignores that. But whenever Arkham did, they were like, "Wow, this is amazing."
Moving on to a straight classic Spidey Squad is the one, the only, the Ultimate Spider-Man. This game was incredible, not only for the way it looked, for the amazing story that it had, but mainly for the combat. And this was something that Treyarch was really kind of going out of their way to start doing, is actually go on to not a movie-based game, but rather an actual original Spider-Man game. Ultimate Spider-Man came out in 2005, and this was a really original take on Spider-Man, straight from the new comics at the time, and showing how they incorporated just how perfect he is in the comics into the way that he speaks, the way that the game's story is written, and the graphics, and mainly the combat. It's great overall. Now, the combat is something that's really interesting with this game. You have your standard punches and your standard kicks with square and triangle. You have circle to grab your enemies if you want to, and you can dodge people by jumping twice because you have a double jump. So if you pressed it once, you just jumped. If you pressed it again, you did a double jump, but that also acted as your Spidey sense when you tried to avoid danger when you were fighting enemies. And also you had L2 to be a web button. You could shoot out web lines towards your enemies, and then you could do different things with the webs. You can either hang them up lampposts, but in this game, compared to Spider-Man 2, if you hang an enemy off of a lamppost in Spider-Man 2 after you defeat them, they stay there forever, which is amazing, and I really hope that's in Spider-Man PS4. And for Ultimate Spider-Man, if you do that, you just hang them up there, and then they fall back down. And with the webbing, you can shoot out a web line, and you can press square to bring the enemy towards you and smack them down. You can press triangle to bring the enemy towards you and then kick them away, or you can press circle to sling yourself towards them and slam them down onto the ground, which I think is a super cool feature to add into that game with the webbing and how they can use that in the combos with Spider-Man actually fighting. And you can also bounce across the walls or whatever area that you're near in the game to use towards your enemies, which started a little bit of the environment takedowns that Spider-Man uses in the future games that we will be talking about soon. So what are your thoughts on this game, DuckedDuck?
If you're in a small enclosed area, bouncing off the walls makes Spider-Man seem very agile, and it's pretty cool to see him bounce around the enemies and stuff. Another thing is hanging people from lamppost is one of the coolest things ever, because Spider-Man uses webs, and it's an alternate way to take down people. If you are able to stick a web to someone, you are able to fling them around and knock out other people. But the only way to take out a thug or an enemy is to actually web them down once they've been knocked out. Because if you don't, they'll get right back up again, and you'll have to keep fighting.
When it comes to Ultimate Spider-Man's gameplay, the bouncing around kind of look to it was, to me, very reminiscent of the Ultimate Comics. Because in the Ultimate Comics, whenever he would fight, he would almost seem like he just like came off the wall. Like when he was like punching someone, his body would like kind of stretched out, like as if he like came jumping right off the wall. The way that you had to like take down an enemy was you could either beat like the living hell out of them, or you could web them up. Me personally, when I played the game, I loved tanking the people from the lamppost. The webbing was my favorite thing to use whenever I used to like web them to the ground. Like Evan said, just to see them there for like the whole time was kind of neat.
And an honorable mention for the combat as well is that once you defeat an enemy, you actually have to make sure that you web them on the ground so that they don't keep getting up to fight you. Because since that Spider-Man in Ultimate Spider-Man was 15 years old, and he did have super strength, he was still young, which means he was still growing his strength, which means he was a bit weaker than the Spider-Man from Web of Shadows, for example. And mainly with how he was fighting with his agile punches and kicks, he also had to make sure that the webs did conceal them on the ground, so that way they did not keep getting up to try and fight you while you kept trying to save people from the bad guys. Now moving on to another Spider-Man game, which some fans do appreciate for the combat, but not necessarily for the game itself, and that is Spider-Man 3 in 2007, the movie game. There's not really a lot to discuss about this one, since basically what Treyarch did, which if you don't know, Treyarch are the developers of the Spider-Man movie games, they basically toned down the combat from Spider-Man 2 to make it feel a bit more realistic, because in Spider-Man 2, you can obviously send people to their flying dooms by pile driving them from the Empire State Building into the streets below, and then just going and breaking people's backs also in Spider-Man 2 with the combat in the streets, and swing kicking them. So in Spider-Man 3, they wanted to tone it down a bit, so they made it so that they went back to the old school routes, where square was a light attack, and then triangle was a heavy attack. It was a full-on heavy attack. And then you could also charge your attacks to make them more effective, and then you had circle to use your webs, and you also had the spider reflexes to dodge if you held down L1, and you could jump around and swing around and try and make it more a refined system for the Spider-Man 2 combat. But really, since there was no pile driving involved in Spider-Man 3, and they kind of took out some of the cooler web-based attacks in Spider-Man 3's moveset, that caused some Spider-Man fans to not really like that combat from that game as much as they did with Spider-Man 2. So what are your thoughts, DuckedDuck?
Again, Spider-Man 3 was just an all-round version of Spider-Man 2, and at some points you would feel overpowered, and at some points you would feel helpless. I remember certain missions where you would have to fight these people, and these like punk rock guys, and they're like impossible to beat sometimes. And then when you're on the streets, you can like easily take out all these guys, and the combat is just, it's messed up and it doesn't work at sometimes, and at other times it's too good. Sometimes it's flawed, and other times it makes you too strong.
My opinion on Spider-Man 3's combat, it was very much like Spider-Man 2's combat. Like DuckedDuck said, it's very toned down. Like Evan said, it's very toned down. I remember there was this weird like part of the fighting where you could activate your spider sense and you could just like attack, I think, multiple people at once. But then there would be like that awkward moment where you like zoom in and out of like slow motion. So for me personally, it was just very clunky in the way that it was handled. It went wrong, considering that they had the perfect game to just do everything on, and yet they completely just shattered their own dimension.
As an honorable mention, there was actually a rage mode that you could use when you were in the black suit, because a thing that Spider-Man 3 had was that you had the black suit and the red suit to fight in with Spider-Man because of the movie, so you could use both suits, and each suit had a different move set. Some in the red suit was more agile, more acrobatic, more fluid, and the black suit more aggressive, more tough, more powerful, stronger, not as agile, not as acrobatic, but just straight to the point, bare knuckle brawling fighting style that the black suit had in that game. And I actually did really appreciate that within Spider-Man 3, and that the black suit had a rage mode that you could activate to make a devastating blow to your enemies when fighting them, and you could actually use super moves on your enemies just like you could in the red suit, but in the black suit they were much more aggressive and very, very ferocious. Now, getting into my favorite Spider-Man game of all time, not just because of the story or the graphics or the fact that the black suit is in it, and mainly the combat. This is the pinnacle standpoint of a perfect Spider-Man game that fully encapsulates how Spider-Man should fight in the games, ranging from how he was shown off in his comics, and the movies, and the TV shows. This game encapsulates Spider-Man's combat fighting style perfectly. And if you guys did not know, in the comics there is an actual version of his fighting called The Way of the Spider, which is basically his own based fighting skill that he made himself with his way of how he fights in the comics. He ended up calling it The Way of the Spider. So if anything is close to that combat style from the comics, it's this game right here, and that is the one and only Spider-Man Web of Shadows. I don't even know where to start with this game. Mainly, again, you have the red suit Spider-Man, you got the black suit Spider-Man. You got comic book Spider-Man, which means that they can do crazy comic book stuff in regards to the game story and the combat, but mainly with the combat, you have giant, cool, crazy, atrociously vicious, awesome black suit tendril-based attacks. For the black suit in Spider-Man Web of Shadows, you can use devastating tendril sweep attacks in the street. You can explode your chest with a massive amount of tendrils exploding to people in the streets and symbiotes in the city. You can fight on freaking walls in this game. And if you switch continuously between the red suit and the black suit, you can come up with some crazy combo variations. You have the red suit, which is the light Spider-Man, who has graceful, extremely acrobatic, very honed skills with fighting, how he uses his acrobatic punches and kicks and web-based maneuvers while he uses his web shots as well while fighting in the game with enemies. And when you fight on walls, you can also use the red suit with kicks, massive combo build-ups, and crazy web-based attacks while trying to trap people or enemies in your webs. My favorite standout point about this entire game, hands down, is the one and only mechanic that I think defines how a Spider-Man game should encapsulate the combat, which I do see Insomniac trying their best to input into Spider-Man PS4, and I do think that they will do a really good job, and that is the Web Strike. The Web Strike is what I've dreamed of for a Spider-Man game for so long, and it happened when Web of Shadows was released in 2008. Jumping from one villain not only is great for combat, where you use your webs to zip from one enemy to another, jump off them, attack them, damage them, jump off them, and go straight to another one. You can also use it as a great way of traversal. You can immediately do a web strike, cancel it if you want to by jumping over an enemy, and go straight into a web swing. And if you want, you can kick enemies with your web swing. There's so many crazy varieties of combat that you can use with the red suit, black suit, on walls, in the air, on the street, crazy ways if you are actually enveloping your time in this game. There are so many combinations of techniques that you can use within the variety of the combat for this game, and Shaba Games, the developer of that game, did a fantastic job. So what are your thoughts, DuckedDuck?
Another important aspect of the Web Shadows combat is the wall combat. While crawling around on the walls, there are actually symbiote-infected people, and there are some crazy combos you can do in there. One of my favorite things about the wall combat is the fact that you can pull the web to the top or the bottom or wherever you need to go on the building and slide yourself up the building. Not only can you slide up the building, you can also attack while sliding. And another thing is switching between suits. If you actually use the black suit, if you're using the tentacle move, which pulls the enemy towards you, you can stand up and you are like grabbing them by the throat, which looks pretty cool. And the combos are deadly. There's so many combos you can perform. Heavy combos, light combos, strike combos, explosive combos, protective shields. There's lots of cool stuff about the wall combat that I could really go in depth into.
The Web of Shadows game does have a very unique combat. As much as I'm a man of science and I like to see things based in physics, with this game it's an exception, because honestly they add a certain kind of flair to it that makes it a wonder to watch. You know, all the combos you can pull, all the different things you can do. Everybody, from what I've seen, everybody has the choice to play the game differently. Pretty great, because I've never seen a game where the combat is so unique that you never see pulled off twice. You know, the fact that you can just run on walls and you can beat up enemies right there, you can take your battles to the sky and you can just kick total ass there. It's pretty amazing, and I've never seen that really done in the game before. It'd be nice to see that in the Spider-Man game again, but I kind of doubt we're gonna get something as great as Web of Shadows.
Exactly, because Shaba Games did something that no other developer did, was actually encapsulate how Spider-Man should fight in a game with crazy different variations of web maneuvers, symbiote attacks, and even if the symbiote wasn't in the game, the red suit Spider-Man also fights incredibly cool, not only because of how graceful and agile he is, but also the difference between him and the black suit, where it's more powerful, straight up strong, and kinda evil, with the symbiote tendrils being a big part of the game aspect of the story, and also being input into Spider-Man's combat as well, is crazy awesome. Moving on to a really cool feature that Web of Shadows actually had was special attacks. You could use 3 varieties of special attacks on your enemies for both suits. So basically, if you pressed L1 and triangle, you could do an attack that honed on to one specific enemy, where you could take them out and make the battle against them, like a main boss fight, really wage for your side of the fight instead of theirs. The second one, if you pressed L1 and square, you did a blast radius effect attack, where you could use your webs in the red suit or the symbiote tendril punch in the black suit to take out multiple enemies around you to give you some space to breathe and figure out your next battle plan. The third one is actually a trapping motion, where you can either bring enemies towards you in the black suit and take them all out, or splat them all away from you from the red suit with your webs to just web them up and stick them to the walls of the ground or the ceilings of everything, and that way you can have more room to breathe and more time to figure out your game strategy, and also take them out one by one individually if they are trapped with your webs. So moving into one of the most unique Spider-Man games that I've seen in the past few years, and I'm actually replaying right now on my channel, go check it out, Radioactive Replay, is Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, and we're actually gonna bring Edge of Time into here too, because they're technically the same type of game in the aspect of they were both made by Beanox. They both have 2 certain Spider-Man that were featured in both games, and the move set between the both of them are still the same. It's just that in Edge of Time, the move set was a bit different. So basically, in Shattered Dimensions, you had 4 different Spider-Man with 4 unique combat styles. You had Noir, which was the standard bare-knuckle brawler Spider-Man, which actually just used his fists and his wits during fights. You had Ultimate Spider-Man, which used the power of the symbiote in the black suit, just like Web of Shadows. In this one, it was more close quarters, it was more defined, it wasn't as huge scale like it was in Web of Shadows. It was a bit more tough and durable when the symbiote tendrils were fighting villains, because you fought different types of villains in each level of that game for all Spider-Man. But basically, for the Ultimate suit, you had the symbiote tendrils doing the majority of the attacks and damage in the Ultimate Dimension. And also, we have Spider-Man 2099, which was also featured in Edge of Time, and in both games, Spider-Man 2099 had fast combat. He had fast-paced, fluid, vivid, really quick style of combat. They said in the development interviews for that game that they were inspired to use the Lucha Libre style of fighting in real life within Spider-Man 2099's fighting style, and also, funny enough, that was also implemented into the Amazing Spider-Man games, but mainly with Spider-Man 2099, you see that he uses a lot of kicks, he uses a lot of fast-paced slashes with his talons on his hands, and the super speed that he has with his suit that he uses in the dimension. And finally, we have the Amazing Spider-Man, which is the classic Spider-Man, which they went full-on comic book status with that fighting. He was agile, quick, but mainly he used his webs. He used web-based maces and hammers and balls and web fists and awesome stuff like that. And he also had the ability to grab ground pavement pieces from the actual pavement, stick it with webs, and slam it at enemies. And also, in all the dimensions, they use grab techniques and quick versions of the web strike. Instead of the web strike, being able to use it around the city and just go from one enemy to the next, on the walls, onto the sky, into the air, onto the ground with the web strike and Web of Shadows. In this, it was just one way to just attack the enemy from a long distance and then just attack them up close and personal. And in each dimension, with their own unique fighting style of combat, my personal favorite is the Ultimate with the symbiote, but mainly the most realistic one, which Insomniac might be looking at for Spider-Man PS4, is the Noir fighting style, where there was straight up bare-knuckle brawling. There was no fake comic book ways of fighting. It was just straight punching and quick, agile feats of punching and kicking and blocking. And also, you had a cool move of the defensive stance, where you could engage into a dodge mechanic that you can automatically dodge all enemy attacks as long as you kept holding down the button, and you can also dodge out of the way for other enemies that were coming at you to fight, and it could be used in really strategic ways. So what are your thoughts, guys?
About, Amazing combat, he uses lots of stuff that is, made out of webs, like hammers and maces, and that kind of reminded me of the 60s cartoon for some reason, so I was kind of happy with that. But my favorite combat would probably be Noir, because stealth, and just like the hard hits that he has. The stealth combats are one of my favorite parts of the games because you sneak around in the shadows, and when you're unexpected, you swoop down and you take away.
When first playing Edge of Time and when I first saw the trailers, one thing I was very worried about was creating a difference between all four of the Spider-Men. At the time I thought it'll just be like the same kind of combat. Obviously they were going to look different, and they're both in their city and in the way that they themselves left, obviously. But I just thought, like, what the motions that they would perform, like what they do in web swinging and all that, I thought that would look all the same. I'm really happy to see different fighting styles between them. For example, the Amazing Spider-Man, he would have one form. I believe he would shoot his webbing at the ground, he would rip out the concrete, and then he would just like slam into enemies, which I thought that was very cool. He would also do normal, like, punching and kicking, which was cool. Spider-Man 2099, he would jump up in the air and he would like attack them and slash them with his claws, and I thought that was cool. Ultimate Spider-Man, he would fight with the tentacles, kind of like in Web of Shadows. He would fight with tentacles. He also himself had a rage meter, which I thought was kind of cool. Something that they brought over from the Spider-Man 3 game, I would be willing to say. Noir, it kind of reminded me of kind of like those like battles that they would have, like those fights that they would have at, like, a pub, you know, like back in the old like days of like back in the old Gothic days, they would always have like a pub fight, like a bar fight or something, and that's kind of what his fighting style reminded me of. So I'm glad they kept it different. I'm glad they kept it unique to each of their own universes, and that's all I have to say for that.
Now we're moving on to the last couple of games on this list, specifically, of course, the games that we have to mention at some point that not a lot of us in the Spidey Squad and just other Spider-Man fans around not really too fond of these games. Me personally, I like the first one more than the second one. Other people seem to like the second one more than the first one, or vice versa. It depends on what your preference is, but mainly for the combat, it is for the Amazing Spider-Man games. And basically, to sum it up, they just copy and pasted the Arkham combat. I mean, sorry, guys, there's not really any other way to look at it. Straight up, you have triangle to counter, just like in Batman Arkham. You have square to attack, just like in Batman Arkham. You have circle to shoot your webs, well, as in Batman Arkham, you could use your cape to stun enemies, but in the Spider-Man games, you just use your web shooters to shoot web shots at enemies to wrap them up in web, and then you can also just dodge out of the way and just use your webs to take them down if you want in kind of stylistic ways during the combat, and you can just punch them until they fall down, and that was that. And basically, there were cool animations for you to take out enemies when you were fighting in the Amazing Spider-Man 1, because in the Amazing Spider-Man 1, you fought a bit faster, whereas in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, you fought a bit slower, but with a bit more strength. Whereas in the Amazing Spider-Man, you felt more vivid, fast, and kind of quick, like how Spider-Man should fight, kind of like what we're seeing in Spider-Man PS4, funny enough. But mainly, with these two games, there's not really a lot to talk about. It was just the same type of stylistic combat that you had from the Arkham games, and Beanox just made it into Spider-Man, which is basically how he had it, where his spider sense went off when there was an enemy nearby, and he used his spider sense to counter that enemy, and then he fought them with his punches and kicks and webs. And like I said earlier, is that Beanox actually inspired that game's combat, or those games' combat, with Lucha Libre, the realistic fighting style of Mexican luchadors, into Spider-Man's combat, just like he was inspired in the movie, in the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, where he crashed down and he saw the luchador poster in the movie. So they tried to inspire the fighting in the games with that little tidbit in the movie. So that's a little fun fact. Basically, not anything really special here, just kind of another version of the Arkham combat. What are your thoughts, DuckedDuck?
Again, the Amazing Spider-Man combat is like the Arkham combat, but it's also cheap down, and it could be better than what it is. And it's pretty much button mash, button mash, button mash, triangle or Y, depending on your console. Dodge, button mash, button mash, button mash, dodge, button mash, dodge. And that's pretty much all it is.
Yeah, I'd have to say the same thing. It is very much just button mashing. If you remember Godzilla Mendoza's retrospective on the games, he himself could not have said it better. Where you can literally just press triangle and square over and over again, and that would just be the fighting. Yes, it did have a very unique look to it. I wouldn't say unique, but it did have a very kind of special look to it, where his fighting would look like gymnastics, like a mix of gymnastics and like some form of martial arts, which I thought that was pretty cool. By its own, it's not very memorable, I'd have to say. I had to watch a video on someone fighting just like some random thug, like in the arcade, but just to remember what I was talking about.
You can also do web balls, and they literally do nothing except hit the enemy. So there's literally no point in that mechanic. It's just another button to press. It's pretty much rinse and repeat. That's
exactly
combat.
Exactly.
Couldn't agree more, guys. Now moving on to the greatest ever of all time, of ever all time, best ever superhero fighting in any video game that we have seen, in a character that has been encapsulated perfectly within the role of who he is in the video game, from the story to the graphics to the main gameplay mechanics of the game, but mainly with the revolutionary combat that this company did for this character in a video game is beyond incredible, and that is the Batman Arkham game's fighting of combat. This isn't the Spider-Man game, but of course this is the game that everyone is comparing Spider-Man PS4's combat to, and how they're saying that, again, Spider-Man PS4's combat is just going to be a knockoff of the Arkham combat, where really, I don't think that's the case at all. And basically, what else is there to say? You have fluid, vivid combat with Batman. You have smooth transitions from him using his gadgets, to fighting with his fists, to using his cape, to using, now in Arkham Knight, you can use the Batmobile in combat, which is flat out crazy, and just really smooth mechanics with Batman fighting, with all the ways that you can take out villains from the stealth, but also with mainly fighting in the combat, with you can take down people with special takedowns, with group takedowns, you can use your sidekicks to help you out during combat, you have the free flow combat system, which is totally flawless in every single way possible, and the fact that Rocksteady was able to do something like that in the time of how they did it, when they did it all the way in 2009, accomplishing that feat of a video game developer, is straight up crazy. And really, we couldn't ask for anything better from the Arkham combat. Again, Arkham Knight is my favorite Batman game, but mainly comparing Arkham Knight to Spider-Man PS4's combat, because since Knight is the most recent Batman game, we're going to be comparing Knight to Spider-Man PS4, but mainly with Arkham Knight, there are really cool factors in the combat. What do you think, Araknid?
Again, I see it really as just smooth and very, like, you know, on point. But me personally, I just see it as really every other kind of fighting combat, whatever, you know. When you just be, I don't know, me personally, this may be why they compare Arkham to the Amazing Spider-Man game series, because it's just, for me personally, it's just button mashing. I like the games, I like the story, and I'm a big fan of them, but the combat was just never really my taste. I never understood why everybody would unique combat. That's just my take on it.
Now, the big finale, Spidey Squad. We are finally at the main event of this video. It's Spider-Man PS4's combat. When the Spidey Squad and I were reacting to the combat for the first time when E3 2017 was happening, we lost our minds. It was so fluid, fast, and fun. That's what I got when I saw the combat, is it looked fun as hell. Going around, shooting webs at each enemy, being able to freaking kick them up into the air and web them down, and then doing finishing attacks just like you can do in the Arkham games, and then moving on to the second combat sequence where you can use that giant, huge metal structure to slam into 3 inner demons at once, and then kicking someone into the air, kicking them off the building, and bringing them back onto the building is crazy cool. And the way on how Insomniac is handling this, especially with seeing the inner demon Bruiser, the heavy inner demon, coming up for close quarters combat where you're pulled in more, it's more ferocious and it's more personal to take out that little mini boss. It's very, very cool, and it's really awesome to see how fast-paced and fun that this game seems to be doing with the combat, especially with how each fight is going to be different. Because if you have seen on Insomniac Games' Twitter page, you can determine how the fight goes. You can use the environment, all of the environment if you want to, only using the environment if you want to. You can use only your webs, you can use just your fists. You can do so many different varieties of combat that you can do during Spider-Man PS4's fighting mechanics, and seeing how they're implementing a lot of slow motion during the fighting. It's because of how you want to be aware when fighting on who to go after, because there might be a lot of enemies on screen at once that you have to go after, so that might be one factor. And also it's showing how your spider sense works to make sure that you're alert of the danger, making sure that you keep taking out all the inner demons that you keep fighting. And also when you see your different options, you have a web trip mine and web shooter varieties that you can use, that there will be more in the game, because all what we saw so far was normal webbing and the web trip mine. There will most likely definitely be more, since Peter's a scientist in the game, so he can upgrade it. But mainly with the fighting, it's vivid, it's fast, it's fluid, and basically with fighting inner demons, you have a lot of improvisation, because that is one thing that Insomniac said during their E3 interviews, is that, to quote them, they said that Spider-Man's combat in Spider-Man PS4, basically to sum it up in 2 words, is acrobatic improvisation. That is exactly what Insomniac has said to describe the combat. It's going to be how Spider-Man basically is in Web of Shadows, where you can use the web strike in cool ways, mixing that up with the ground and air takedowns. So what we saw in the game, it's going to be more realistic, of course, in Spider-Man PS4, but basically, we have realistic combat mixed with fluid combat and fast-paced combat from Ultimate Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, and also Web of Shadows, because basically, when you are countering, quote-unquote, in Spider-Man PS4, you press circle, because that seems to be the button that you use to counter. You press circle to counter, but you don't counter. You dodge. You press circle to dodge the enemies in order for you to get behind them and shoot webs at their faces to stun them. You do not counter, just like in the Batman Arkham games. All you do when you press triangle, you counter, and that way you take out an enemy. In this, you aren't countering. You're basically jumping over the guy and shooting webs at their faces to dodge and make sure that you really effectively get out of the way of their fighting maneuvers and their acrobatic ways of how the Inner Demons are going to use guns to kill you. Maybe with the Heavy Inner Demon Bruiser, they use the negative energy to kill you. Other enemies in the game will be in there, so they're probably going to use different types of weapons to take you out. So there's going to be lots of different varieties of how you can fight the people in the game. And basically what we saw with those two little main sequences, also the third one where you fight the Bruiser, but the main two fighting sequences where you see Spider-Man fighting, it's going to be very cool to see just how you can improvise your combat in a very unique way while taking out all these different types of enemies that will be in the game. So what are your thoughts, Araknid?
Everywhere I go, I keep seeing people compare certain games to the Arkham style of combat, but and this game is no exception. But for me personally, I honestly don't see why it would be compared, because me personally, they're almost nothing alike. The environmental takedowns, that's something we've seen before, but here it's almost everywhere. You know, like with most areas, they would have like an environment, and they would place certain objects in there that would randomly spawn one time or another that you visit that area, and then you would use that for your environmental takedown. But for me, how I see it in this game, to me, it looks like almost anything is your environmental takedown. Earlier, when you're doing the stealth section, you can have that crane smash that one dude in the face and knock him out. I thought that was pretty cool. When he's fighting the gang up on near the rooftop section, he shoots the steel bar, and then he fires his webbing from at the steel bar. He yanks it over, hitting all three of them at once. I thought that was great, personally, because it shows really how much time was put into this game to think about, like, okay, what would be that kind of setting? What would be there naturally? Not something easy like an alley, but something like a construction site. You could obviously, they wouldn't put a dumpster at like the 35th floor of like the building. Obviously, there'd be something like cranes and bricks and stuff, and that's what's used in that area. So, me personally, the environmental takedowns are my favorite part. Another aspect of the combat, dodging. I didn't really see any counterattacks, which is something that I thought was a huge difference between Arkham. In Arkham, when you're fighting, there's an option to, what you have to do in the game is, as you're fighting, you also have to counterattack. When you counterattack, it says dodge, but you're really just, when it says dodge, you just hit two dudes, and that's extra. But like, what I feel like Spider-Man would do is, he would do what he does in the demo. So far, from what Insomniac has shown us, I think the combat, I think the swinging, I think everything will be great, you know, just in general. It's like what my boy Evan here said. Hashtag Insomniac we trust.
Exactly. Hashtag in Insomniac we trust, Spidey Squad. They will not let you down in terms of the story, graphics, gameplay, combat, etc. They will do this game justice, I swear to you. I promise. Just look at how passionate they are on Twitter with all of us and what they just showed us in the demo. It's going to be one heck of a good time, and the combat is just one aspect of the game that will make it totally awesome. And seeing what they showed us with being able to use your webs, spider sense, dodging, and just really cool acrobatic improvisation combat styles, I think this combat is going to be really, really fun. I don't know if it's going to beat the Arkham combat, because Rocksteady did a fantastic job with all the Arkham games. It obviously may not beat the Arkham combat, but I do think it will at least be on par with it. So that is our thoughts for Spider-Man PS4's combat. Thank you so much to Araknid-Tech and DuckedDuck for being a part of this collaboration with me. They are incredibly awesome. Go follow them on Twitter and subscribe to their YouTube channels. They are doing tons of really cool Spider-Man and other content on their channels as well. So stay tuned to their channels for really cool stuff, and also stay tuned to my channel and the rest of the Spidey Squad's awesome channels for more Spider-Man PS4 content. Everybody, thank you so much for watching, everybody. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Peace out.